everybody. Welcome to Ask the Pastor. I am Matt Love. I am here with Pastor JD Greer. And I said this kind of in the teaser at the end of the last episode, but this is a question from Tristan. But Tristan is asking a question that a younger version of myself needed this podcast to answer. So everyone in my life regrets that I didn't have this podcast 10 years ago, JD. But Tristan says, as Christians, how can we be honest about an individual's poor performance? In my case, scoring a poor performer based on their work quality with grace and love. And maybe to simplify the question a little bit, how can I give honest criticism with grace and love? JD,
I would say, is your stage name Tristan, Matt?
Yes.
Are you setting up for some critique of me? Is that what I should expect after this podcast?
I'm depending on how you answer this question is going to define what our next episode of the podcast is all about. So,
well, listen, hey, Tristan, whoever you are, this is, actually, man, what a pressing question. And I'll try to answer it in the context you're giving it in, which is in the workplace context. Although I think what we're going to say here would apply to friendships or, family relationships. But yeah, I think especially in this discussion, we don't have to see grace and love and honest feedback as opposites. Mm-hmm. In fact, I wouldn't even say they're really in tension at this point. I think one can be done in the service of the other. And it's true, we could give honest feedback that's harsh and unkind and really from the wrong motive. I'll talk about that in a second. But also, when you do love someone and you want to see them become the best version of them and you love the mission that you're a part of or the task you're a part of at work, I mean, there's lots of ways that you can do this out of a heart of love. Just to be honest, because I feel like there's some people that wrestle with this side of it, is that it's actually not kind to anyone to allow certain things, certain bad behaviors, certain poor performance to go unchecked. If you're in business, it's not kind to your shareholders or to other business partners when you don't give the criticism that is necessary to help improve the product. It's even sometimes not kind to the person who's doing the poor performance because you're allowing them, to be. And you're allowing them to persist in something that's not helping them or the mission. Sometimes the most loving thing to do can even be to let somebody go. In the 20 plus years that I've been a pastor, I can think of at least once, a couple times, that I had to let somebody that was really close to me, somebody I loved a lot, a friend, one of them was a very close friend, had to let them go. And it caused me tears and heartache, but I ultimately knew that not only was I not doing right by the church and keeping this person in this position, I actually wasn't even doing right by them. I was like, everybody wants to be in a place where they're good at something and they're thriving at something. And I wasn't helping this person by just allowing them to continue on in a job they weren't good at. And so it doesn't have to be opposite. One of the things we say around the Summit Church is that we desire to give and receive godly feedback. We want to give and receive godly feedback. We do that for the sake of the mission. The mission we're part of is so important. Well, I think Christian mission ought to be held to, if you could say this, higher standards than anything in the business world, because our mission is more important than what's going on in the mission world. Tristan's question was, how do you do that with grace and love? Now, let me just throw out some things to keep in mind that, almost think of this like a little map or a checklist you want to be thinking through as you go through a situation like this. The first one, I always love to start with this one, is that verse in Proverbs that says, it is the glory of a man to overlook an offense, which means that it is glorious a lot of times that you just literally overlook what is happening because, I don't know, it may irritate you, but you're just showing patience. So you always want to ask, is this something in the list of priorities for that person's development or in the job we're trying to do? Is that something that needs to be dealt with now? Yeah. Is it hurting this person's forward progress? Is it hurting their relationships? I realize that there's a lot of things in the people that I work with that are going to irritate me, right? There's things about me that irritate them, but any functional, healthy relationship, there's a lot that gets you just overlook. And that is glorious to do that, whether it's marriage, friendship, or work. Here's the second thing I would say is you do this, whatever you do it with reflection about your own motives. Is my critique of this person coming out of personal irritation? Is it coming out of my own frustration that things aren't working the way that I want them to work? A lot of times I'll vent on somebody, not really because they've done a terrible job, just because it didn't work out the way that I wanted to, and I need somebody to take that out on. Is this personal irritation? Or is it coming out of love, a real concern both for them and for the job that we're trying to do? Here's my third one. Give yourself an ample amount of time. Give yourself time to calm down. I've always loved this story about Abraham Lincoln. I assume that it's true. I heard it is true, but when he died, he had a drawer full of letters of people that he had reamed, just expressed his anger. But he would never send those letters until at least 24 hours later. And he said the majority of them he never sent because in the heat of the moment, he just felt like laying into somebody. He wrote it all down so he could get it out on paper, then put it in a drawer, read it a day later and thought, I shouldn't say 90% of these things. And the 10% I do say, I should say in a different way, in a different context. That is not just a good lesson from a great leader like Abraham Lincoln. It's what Proverbs tells us. At Proverbs 12:18, there's one whose rash words are like sword thrusts, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. How many times have I given critique to somebody that it was like a sword thrust? Man, I'm just like trying to cut them because you did this and this was terrible and this is irritating. The tongue of the wise, though, maybe saying some of the same things, but it's bringing healing, not just slicing and dicing a person. Proverbs 25:11, like apples of gold and settings of silver is a word spoken in right circumstances. Now, I love that verse because it means it's not just the content of what you're saying is right, but the timing is right. It's usually better face to face. That's one practical way that you can do it in grace and love. This may be exaggerated, but I think the concept is right. You ever heard that, only 7% of what we communicate to one another happens in the words we say. The other 93% is tone of voice, facial expression, body language. That makes things like texting or even email the worst method. Even if those percentage numbers are off, I still think there's something about sitting down and looking at somebody saying these things. That's timing and personal, just personal presence. Here's my fourth one. Always think of it in terms of the whole person, not just this one thing you're critiquing. And what I mean by that is, have I balanced this critique that I'm giving on their poor performance? Have I balanced that with enough positive? I'm not talking about just the compliment sandwich.
Yeah.
People kind of get wise to that when you're like, Matt, you're so awesome. Matt, you really stink at this. Matt, you're also awesome. People, they realize you're just, but in general, I always think of this with my kids. Are they going to remember Dad as the guy who always found something to critique about what they were doing? Or are they going to remember Dad as the guy who loved and believed in them more than anybody else?
Yeah.
Think about the people who had the biggest impact on you, and it's almost always somebody that believed in you, not somebody that was able to critique and nitpick you.
Yeah.
And you just want to think about that. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think that's a really good point. And it's one of the things, I work with a lot of church planters and church leaders. And one of the biggest things we tell them when they're just coaching people in general or leading people is, people are a lot more able to hear critique in the context of your desire to develop them, right? And so I think it's kind of what you're getting at. If you're in a relationship with somebody where you're able to encourage and affirm and cast vision for where they're going, then the critique becomes a part of that process of getting them to where you feel like they could be if they are maximizing their potential or going where God is calling them to go. There's kind of this sense of process there that's happening that allows people to hear those critiques in a different light. And so I think just even thinking about that framework that you just mentioned is really helpful and definitely something that we've seen be really beneficial to a lot of leaders.
Yeah, Matt, one helpful way that we've found to kind of communicate that, just in sort of a short little line here at the Summit Church, is we say, rather than always feeling like we need to notice the weaknesses and assuming the strengths, we should flip that. We should assume the weakness and notice the strengths.
Yeah.
And what that means is I assume that we're all going to do lots of things wrong. I want to notice the strengths. A lot of times we take the strengths for granted and we got to point out the weaknesses. Man, I don't know about you, when somebody calls out strengths, even in things I've done over and over and over again, man, I just feel like, okay, they believe in me. And then it makes me a lot more open to that when it's coming in the context of somebody who really believes in me. Here's my last one, my last kind of thing on the map here is do it with humility when you're giving that. Remember how much you've failed, how much other people have been patient with you, not to mention how patient God has been with you. And just say that, I'm critiquing you right now. I know this is hard to hear, but in the back of my mind, I'm just thinking about all those times that I haven't lived up to the things that I should do with other people, much less with God. Galatians 6:1 says, if a person's overtaken in a fault, restore them gently, considering yourself, because you also are subject to the same temptations, and just realize that you're doing it from a place of I'm not different than you, even though I'm the one doing the critiquing. We're in the same boat, and that humility will come through.
So JD, that's really good. I know there's one tool that you've shared with our staff, and that kind of Summit has used that kind of gives some categories for types of feedback that I know has been helpful for me and for a lot of our staff. And I was wondering if you would be willing to share that. It's kind of it's like the fearless feedback quadrants or something like that.
Yeah. Well, let me give credit where credit's due here. We actually borrowed this from Apple. It's not original. Now, we've tweaked it a little bit to kind of make it our own. But it basically was the quadrants of what they call fearless feedback. I don't know, maybe fearless feedback was our word, but whatever, the quadrant came from them. And basically, I'll give it to you since I can't, actually draw it out for you here. But you think, like a quadrant there, and in the upper left corner, we got general positive, and in the bottom right corner, you got general negative. All right, and in the top right corner, you got positive specific, and in the bottom left corner, you got negative specific. And let me describe it. Okay, so general positive feedback is like, Matt, great job. Matt, you're awesome. Man, I just love it. Or people to me, general feedback is, man, you're a great pastor. I'm grateful for your ministry. Man, your preaching really helps. I love it. It's great. But it's general. I'm not sure what to do more of other than be a great pastor, or
keep doing what
or
you're
try
doing,
to preach better, right? Okay, so, the opposite of that is positive specific. And that's where you connect something specific that I did to the positive outcome. For example, hey, Pastor, the way that you addressed singleness this past week, it really I felt seen, and it was actually so practical. I kind of knew what to do with some of the questions I've had. Or maybe me saying to our small groups pastor, the kind of questions that you wrote in the small group study for this week, man, they really helped my group. But we just came alive. It's like we didn't want to stop talking. Those kind of things. There's an old book called The 1 Minute Manager, and this was the whole kind of premise of it. Is very specific feedback is so much better than general positive, even if your general positive is sincere. I've got a few of my friends who they're a little annoyed by this because they'll try to say something kind, and I'll be like, do you mind telling me what about the message you liked? Because I don't know what to do more of. After you say great message, I'm like, what do I do more of? Okay, so let me keep moving around the quadrant there. So you go to the bottom right and the general negative. That's just where like you're an idiot. I'm just generally disapproving of you. I don't like you. Could you work somewhere else? So those are probably the most unhelpful because I don't even know what to fix now. I just know that you don't like me.
I feel bad about myself, but I can't do anything about it.
Right. Negative specific is, that's where you're speaking to somebody with respect in light of the 5 things that I kind of went through up there, a moment ago. And I'm saying to you, hey, because you did it this way, to use our small group pastor example again, hey, because you asked the question in such a general way, my group didn't know what to do. And it was just sort of, we kind of stared at each other for a while. I really appreciate the work you're doing on these, but here's an example of a question that might really make us come alive. It also means you're praising in public, and this kind of specific criticism, this negative, you're making really specific and in the context of the 5 things I've given you. So, I hope that's Tristan. I hope that's at least an outline for how you could approach it. I would just encourage you. I mean, I don't want to be everybody's. Sometimes we got to have the courage to have hard conversations, but I also want people around me to know that, man, I see what God's doing in you, and I believe in you. And if I got to err on one side, I hope that's what comes through this. I want to err on the side of praising. You got to be a good enough boss that you can give the critique and even let people go when they need to and tell them what they need to hear. But man, assume the negatives, assume the weaknesses, and notice the strengths.
That's good. That's good, JD. Well, that list of 5 things is really a great little framework to kind of work through. Obviously, the feedback quadrants at the end is really good, but I think it's helpful to have something to kind of just check your brain through. Like, all right, let's go down this list. Where am I at? And it helps you kind of get yourself in the right posture and perspective to have whatever conversations you need to have. So thank you so much for that. JD, next week we have a tough question next week. So it's a good one, and I think one that's going to be good to dive into. But the question we're going to be answering is, what should I do if my current marriage began after an unbiblical divorce? If you want to hear that episode and all the other episodes, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe on YouTube at j.d.greer. And as always, this episode is produced by JD Greer Ministries, which also makes a lot of other great resources. jdgreer.com, always a good place to go to find all of the things that JD Greer Ministries is producing. And we will see you next time on Ask the Pastor.